Hello, and I'm back here with the next episode of my series that I've been working on for a while. It's the history of wrestling games on Nintendo 64. And first off, just so you know, anything made by Acclaim, we're not talking about this WWF games, the ECW game. If you're a completist, you want to have all of them and collect them, but without Acclaim on it, it's no good. Let's get that out of the way. So, most people, when they think of the Nintendo 64 and pro wrestling games, they think about No Mercy, which is actually the last game to be released for the N64. The first wrestling game that came out was this one here. It's WCW versus NWO World Tour, and was actually the first game in the US that had the famous control system that's known as the No Mercy system, made by AKI. And this actually was kind of unique in wrestling games that it didn't have just WCW guys. It had actually Japanese wrestlers. The moves were the same, the appearance names were changed, but there was an edit system, so you could edit it back to the real names, and the outfits were sort of accurate. They weren't exact, but you knew who everybody was. You know, if you were a wrestling fan, followed Japanese wrestling, you knew who was who. But in the same time, in Japan, this was released, which was Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, which is the N64 version of the Virtual Pro Wrestling game for the PlayStation 1. And you can see a little sticker here that mentions NWO versus WCW. This is more or less the Japanese version of World Tour. There is a little bit more features in this game. The roster is a little different. Obviously, based in Japan, the Japanese wrestlers are a little more familiar. They aren't changed as much. Copyright law in Japan is a little different. It's a lot more relaxed. I mean, here in the United States, you couldn't have anything with a competitor, whether it's wrestling or any kind of sports. If there's any kind of competition, you only can have what you're licensed to have. In Japan, especially in their games, it seems that as long as you make the most basic attempt to like change names and appearance slightly, even if all these statistics and moves and everything are exactly the same, that seems to be okay. So, you know, it's cultural differences, I guess, but this is actually a really good game. The graphics are a little rudimentary, a little blocky. It's an early, like, 1997 game, so polygons galore, but wrestling-wise, it's actually really great. The follow-up in the US was WCW NWO Revenge. Interesting thing about this game is that it's still, to this day, I think the second or third highest-selling third-party N64 game, so even though No Mercy gets all the glory to this day, still, this was the better-selling game, and actually, in a lot of people's opinions, it's the better game. There's like 63 wrestlers in the roster. The control system was perfected, the graphics were improved. Again, has the extra Japanese wrestlers that are slightly changed. But a lot of things were improved, and more locations, more arenas, things like that. Some were unlockable, some were available from the start, titles, things like that, because WCW had tons of titles, the world title, US title, Cruiserweight, TV title, and all that, and they actually, this one had the WCW title and the NWO version, which was the WCW title with NWO spray painted on the front, which was neat, you know, well, true to what was going on TV at the time. But around this time, though, the license for these games switched from WCW to WWF at the time. As stated before, Acclaim was making their games for the WWF, and they were not good. I mean, graphically, they were okay, but the control was horrible. They were pretty much unplayable, and seeing all the attention that games like Revenge are getting, the WWF, if anything, is not stupid when it comes to business, realize these guys are doing a lot better, so let's get them on our team. So they did, and that was the first game under that release. With THQ did the American version, WrestleMania 2000. This was the first No Mercy style game for the WWF. This one here, I don't know if it'll show correctly, but it has a little stereoscopic card on the back, which was pretty neat at the time. And this was the game, the style of game that we were used to seeing in WCW, only now it was with WWF, which by this point was winning the Monday Night War. This game was actually released in 1999, even though it says 2009. Kind of taking the Madden approach of naming it for the year coming forward. The same time in Japan, Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 was released, and this game basically takes upon WrestleMania 2000 and is the bridge between that and No Mercy. It actually has a license for all Japan Pro Wrestling. It has a lot of the themes, all the title belts. A lot of people, like amateur wrestlers who are in pro wrestling now, like indie wrestlers, things like that, have played this game and were obsessed with it, and that's kind of what got them interested in being wrestlers. And guys like AJ Styles and a lot of the guys who become famous for being, the top independent wrestlers. I believe guys even like CM Punk and like Bryan Danielson, or Daniel Bryan as he's known now in WWE, have mentioned they've played this game before. And what's great about this is that just so much is available. There's different stages. There's a Tokyo Dome. There's a baseball stadium. The different small halls and things that, if you're a fan of Japanese wrestling, these are like famous arenas and places where famous matches have taken place, and you can basically be in those arenas. And not only are all Japan Pro Wrestling titles available, the famous Triple Crown, the double tag titles, but there's unlockable things like the AWA title, the NWA title, a lot of like a season mode. There's a lot of like the Champions Carnival, which is a big summer-long tournament basically in Japan that you can reenact in the game. Now, after this was released, like I said, this was the bridge game. The final game that was released for the N64 for the WWF was the famous No Mercy, and this was kind of the culmination of everything leading up to this. I guess kind of like in Japan when the Emperor dies, his reign was named the Era. So N64 moved on. This was called the No Mercy Era. The whole realm of games we went over here have all been dubbed the No Mercy style because this was the last and probably the most famous one. But like I mentioned before, it was not the best selling. It was actually Revenge was the better selling game. But this is kind of taken a kind of a legacy of its own. It's the legend of this. This is the holy grail. Every wrestling game that's come out since this. The number one critique that always happens is, well, it's not No Mercy style. Fans want games to go back to having this control style that all these games had. The grapples and the reversals and actually the WWE 12 and the SmackDown vs. Raw series before did kind of have a similar style with grapples and moves, the way they were performed. They've actually gotten more as the game has gone on. They've gotten kind of more and more similar to that. So they are kind of going back to that, indirectly. I mean, the actual company that made these. The funny thing is that the company, Aki, that made all these games, they changed their name a couple years ago, and they now make mostly games targeted to like little girls. Kind of funny to see their website now. It's all like unicorns and ponies and glitter, and this is the same company that's famous for pro wrestling and blood and fire and weapons and things like that. But just another case of how the industry changes. But definitely all these games here that we went over, definitely worth picking up. In fact, this game here was the reason that I bought a Japanese to US N64 adapter just to play this game. This and the first one, Virtual Pro Wrestling 1, are really the only two imports that I've owned until just recently. You saw in my previous video that I got the Japanese version of Animal Crossing, but even if you never get any other import games, it's worth to track one down just to get this. This, honestly, my personal favorite. It's probably the best game, period, I played on the N64, and it's definitely the best wrestling game, but really any of these here you can't go wrong. But it's a brief little history of the series as a whole and how things started, going back from 97 all the way up to 2000. And the kind of like the history of how wrestling games became popular. I mean, this era of games here in the N64 is really what made pro wrestling a Madden-like genre in gaming, where every year there's a new release. After this, we're moving into the PlayStation era. That's when these SmackDown games started, with Brock Lesnar on the cover with the Know Your Role. That would turn into SmackDown vs. Raw. Briefly had SmackDown vs. Raw, including ECW, and that was a third brand that went away. And now this year it's WWE 12. Still carrying on the tradition of this era of games, and it's just an interesting thing to see where they've come from. You know, things coming full circle. A lot of what's new and improved for today's games were really started way back when. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video here, and questions, comments, anything like that, leave them below, and see you again with my next episode. It's really been fun doing these, and got a lot of good feedback, so I'm glad that people are enjoying them, and we'll see you around.